when he was so-called a young boy, relatively young, he and his brother, this other one that I mentioned, they used to live very close to the Farbrengen Rebbe in Warsaw when he was in Poland. And they were like, how do you call it, messenger boys for the Farbrengen Rebbe. Anything he needed or anything that needed to be taken care of in his household, any messages needed to be run or anything to get him, etc., etc., Gashmi's bein afila beruchnias, they would run around and they would do the job and the task of bringing these things for the Rebbe. So he had a very special kesher with the Rebbe Rayatz. So I'm told what happened when he came to see the Rebbe in Toshin Test. Exactly what date it was on the calendar, I don't remember. It could be I was told, but I don't remember that part of it. Going back close to 60 years, so it's a bit difficult to remember all the exact details. However, when the Pinyon reached Farbrengen Rebbe in the year Toshin Tes, he came in to where the Farbrengen Rebbe was, and the Farbrengen Rebbe was farbrengen or making a talk for some of the Chassidim. But at that stage, he was very limited physically because he was in a wheelchair and he had also a problem with his speech and so on. So it was difficult for him to communicate in public. But nonetheless, he would sometimes come out and give over a Maimon Chassidus, or he would communicate with the Olam, with the Chassidim. So Rabbi came in when there was a sort of a pause, and the Farbrengen Rebbe was sitting, and he was like together with a group of the Chassidim, as far as I remember what I was told. And so when Rabbi saw the Farbrengen Rebbe, he ran up to where the Farbrengen Rebbe was sitting, and he took in his hands the Farbrengen Rebbe's hand, which normally Chassidim would never touch the Rebbe. Once he became Rebbe, you never touched him or shook his hand or anything like that. And he picked up the Rebbe's hand and he kissed the Rebbe's hand here, like this. So normally, by our Rebbeim, they would have withdrawn their hand, because that wasn't the way things were done in Lvovitz. But nonetheless, the Farbrengen Rebbe did not pull away his hand. Yeah. And so when Rabbi kissed him on the hand, he let it happen. Yeah, he didn't pull his hand back. He let it happen. So we see from that what sort of a very special and remarkable kesher Rabbi had with the Farbrengen Rebbe. And there was all sorts of things I could add to that, but it's not the place here to go into it all. It's just that when he had a Yechidas, years later, what I'm talking about, with the Rebbe, when the Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, was already the Rebbe, he had this Yechidas after he'd been in Melbourne, Australia, collecting the money for the yeshiva in Kwachabad, and he went over to see the Rebbe, and he had Yechidas, and he mentioned about what should be done with me. You follow? Rapinia, all of a sudden, he was the first one to actually speak about it with the Rebbe. And then there was later somebody from Melbourne, Australia, that they went some months later, and they mentioned again about what's happening with me. And the Rebbe said, he said, I don't understand what's the question. I already said what I hold. You understand? The Rebbe said he'd already told Rabbi Altes what he'd held. You know. So he didn't understand why he's being asked again, as it were. You know. So what did he tell him? It just shows you how the control, you know, was unbelievable, and the memory and the diuk of every inyan was pillar-closed. The Rebbe said he's already answered. Okay. And he said, mine, the Rebbe said in Yiddish, that mine is davon blois in Eretz Yisrael. He should go only to Eretz Yisrael.
Whoa.
Yeah. And he should be there, and, you know, ad hoidor chadosha, you know. The Rebbe didn't say how long he's going to be there. He just said, you know, that's where he'll be. And then later, when this other person went, he wanted to say to the Rebbe that I didn't know Hebrew, and that maybe it might be a svara to, you know. So the Rebbe said he doesn't understand what they're asking him. Again, he's already said, you know, he already told Rabbi Altes. And years later, I had a yechidus with the Rebbe myself in Toshin Lamed Hay. This was a long time after I was working in the yeshiva. I had a yechidus with the Rebbe, and then I was caught up with the army over here, and they used to call me up regularly. It messed me up a bit in my work with the Bochner. But another cheshbonos that I had, and I suggested to the Rebbe that maybe I should go for a period to live in America. I should leave Eretz and go over to live periodically, not, you know, ad infinitum, but periodically I should go to live in America. So the Rebbe said, what? Leave Eretz Yisrael? That's what he said to me. Yeah. He said, but are you considering the idea of leaving Israel? So I was a bit taken aback, you know. I could see that I'd hit the wrong note, you know. So I just sort of, you know, mumbled something. I don't know what I said, but I realized that I'd come from, you know, on the wrong pitch line altogether. Because the Rebbe looked at me and he said, well, what, to leave Eretz Yisrael? So this is having written to the Rebbe all the difficulties I was having at the moment. And he didn't pay any attention to that whatsoever. And so the Rebbe used the expression, and he said, you have a shlichus kedosho. That was the expression. He said, you have a shlichus kedosho in Eretz kedosho, and he said, in yeshiva kedosho. Yeah. And he said that yeshiva was founded by Rabbi Seinu Nisienu. And he said, therefore it's a yeshiva kedosho. So the Rebbe said, how could you possibly consider, you know, leaving Eretz Yisrael? So that was it. After that, you know, I was here, and that was it. So that's how the whole thing, it all began with the Rabbi Altes. You know. All right, l'chaim, everybody. L'chaim. So, what do I want to get across to you guys this evening? And that is that Be'ez Hashem, we are meeting on the day of the Gilui of Keser Malchus. Not just the Sfiras of Malchus, because the Rebbe's Sfiras of Malchus Kemavur by everybody. Of Yud Aleph is the Gilui of the Keser of Malchus. In other words, it's the koyach that Malchus takes from a very, very high pneumistic sherish in Atzma Saint Soul to be the ruler and the koveya over the whole world. That's Sfiras HaMalchus. The Kesef from Malchus is the koyach of the Ein Soul which gives Malchus that whole ability to run the whole creation. Spirit of Malchus. So Yud Aleph Shvat is it's well known that the Shalom. Shalom. It's well known that the number 11 is, according to Chassidus and Kabbalah, the number 11 is a very high 10 is the perfection of number. It's 1 to 10. And then after that, you start all over again. You don't just keep counting, but as it were, you go back to the beginning again. And you add 1 to 10, yeah, and 2. And so it's brought down that the Yud Aleph, well, that's indicatory of the Oya, which is beyond altogether the limitations of all the world. And that's the union of Kesser. And on Fridays, when you say the prayer for Erev Shabbos, and you quote the Tikkun Zohar, you use an expression over there in reference to Hashem, and you say, Atu Chad V'loi B'chushban. You are one, and you're not, how to call it, in the cheshbon of number. So, if you say he's one, but he's not in the cheshbon of number, then that's a little bit of a sort of a inter-contradiction. Elamai, well, what does it imply? That there's an inyan of up until 10, you've reached like the end of number. That's like the perfection of what number is all about. When you go into 11, you're going beyond and upwards altogether from the inyan of number. And that's the inyan of Chad. Chad meaning one, but one in a way that he's muvdal, and therefore he unites everything together precisely because he is so muvdal. And so withdrawn, he's got the ability to unite everything together. Oh, that's the inyan of Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban. And that's the inyan of Yud Aleph. That's the inyan of 11. And so the Rebbe accepted the Nasiyas on the 11th day of the 11th month. Yeah? And it was also the 11th year. It was Tovshin Yud Aleph. So it was 11 from all sides. Yeah, it was the 11th day of the 11th month of Tovshin Yud Aleph, which is also 11. Yeah, how do you call it? Tovshin 11. Over Mela, all that indicates that we are muvdal, we're separate from the whole world, but on the other hand, we are connected with them still. Because when I say Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban, if I was talking about something that was completely and utterly divorced altogether from the Oilamas or from the 10, then I wouldn't say Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban. I would just say Antu Chad, or you are just absolutely, completely and utterly beyond everything. If I say Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban, then I'm saying you are beyond all the world, but they are still there. Yeah, the worlds are still there. And that means that somebody who is Antu Chad, who is on such a level of Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban, he's completely out of the world. He's completely beyond. He has power to unite and, as it were, control everything, but he's not separate. He's got a kesher with the 10. He's 11, so he's like a new start after the 10, but he's beyond the 10 altogether. And that's the whole inyan of the Rebbe, and the whole inyan of Melech HaMashiach, is that he's on the one hand, Antu Chad, he's absolutely withdrawn. But on the other hand, he's got a kesher, and he has a very close bind and bond with the whole inyan of the Eser Spheres, and B'meila, all of the worlds. Edifar, it comes to us that the Rebbe is on the one hand, he's very muvdal, and he's very withdrawn. On the other hand, he's shy to each and every one of us. And therefore we see an amazing thing, that I don't know if there's been anybody so completely messed with all the generations, Afila in Lubavitch, if there's ever been anybody so moved on as the Rebbe. And yet, on the other hand, somebody who was involved in each and every life of all the Hasidim. And not only all of the Hasidim, but all of the Anshe Ha'olam, Kipshute, whoever approached the Rebbe, one way or another, he got an answer. And I'll just give you a quick dogma. Before I was telling you about my own point over there with Pinchas Altes. The first letter I wrote to the Rebbe was 41 pages. Yeah, 41 pages in my handwriting. I wrote and I philosophized at great length, in this letter, with all my philosophies and all my, and all the rest of it. And after a certain point, maybe in page 35 or 36, I can't remember when that was, I mentioned that I've already begun making a kesher with, with Lubavitch, and I've met up with certain people, etc., etc. But that was like a much later point in the whole letter. So I never got an answer for quite a while, a long time. I never received any answer. And I said to my mashpia that I'm quite okay with that, because I don't see that what people tell me about the daily Seder of the Rebbe, how is he going to have time to read this 41 pages of this Igeris, So what happened was, I've already told you guys the Maz, I think, that on a very key moment, an absolutely key moment in the whole development of my life, of a very, very important and key moment in my life, I'm sitting in this area of like the base medrash that Lubavitch had in those days. It was in a small building, but it was, they managed to make it a bit broad. And then later they built the big yeshiva that they have nowadays. In those days it was, and I'm sitting here at the table with some of the Hasidim and everything, and all of a sudden I see a guy from the office. He comes in through the main door, and he's got something in his hand, you follow? And he's looking around, and I saw him asking somebody, because he didn't know me personally at that point. Later, I got to know him, but he didn't know who I was. So he had a letter in his hand, and he was asking for me, and he was asking this person, who is this guy, Gafne, who is he, whereabouts is he? So one of them pointed to me, and ultimately he came over and he gave me the letter, and I look at the letter and I see at the top of the envelope, Rabbi M.M. Schneerson I see the Rebbe's name on the letter. So I almost collapsed. I just couldn't believe it. Here, I wrote this letter months and months ago, probably about a year ago, and it was a 41-page letter, like I explained, with the ganze Igeris, with the other Sachen. And the Rebbe found time to read the whole letter, and he answered me quite a long letter in English, and he corrected the English in the letter. Those who typed it had made a slight error in the English grammar, and the Rebbe, underlined that, and he put a little sort of thing between the words, and he corrected that error. You understand? And so here I am sitting at the table. I didn't open the letter because I was involved with certain things that were going on, but I saw that, and sitting alongside me was my mashpia. He was right alongside me, so he made me a sign, like this. So I give him the letter, closed, like it is, but it's got written on it, you know. So he looked at that, and he went white. He mamish turned white. It's mamish a pele, but you can pick on a person, you know, when they mamish, you know, and he mamish turned white. His whole face went white, and he just couldn't believe it, you know. It was, and the unbelievable precision, you know, and he was just he came out collapsed. You follow? So I tried to strengthen him, you know. So we agreed that we would look at it later. We wouldn't read it now, but later when there would be time, you know, we would look at it. So what am I trying to prove from that? What am I trying to establish from that? That we see the koyach of a Emerson Melech. Yeah? Emerson Melech is on the one hand withdrawn. And Dawki, because he's very withdrawn, well, that's how he can be a balabayat of all the people in the country. And he can, you know, have a control and a knowledge of individuals all over and what's happening with them. Dawki, because he's so high and he's so withdrawn, that gives him the power to unite with all the inyan. That's what we see with Moshe Rabbeinu, and we see it so clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu was on the one hand, you know, muvdal b'tachlis from everybody. Nobody could possibly hold by Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega, and yet nonetheless we see that Dawki, because he was like that, Dawki, he was so elevated and so withdrawn, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to be shire to everybody, and he was able to have a kesher and be mashpia on everybody. It didn't matter who. Moshe Rabbeinu was the man. Right? We have these two, how do we describe it, like contrast points, that they lead to an amazing unity. And that's, on the one hand, very withdrawn, but precisely because of that, and Dawki due to that, they had the ability to have to do with every detail and bring it down into the need and the pashtas of that particular individual's requirement. And therefore, all of those who have any sort of hoirua from the Rebbe, whether they had it in person, like Baruch Hashem, I was there later, and not only David Biksav, but in person I heard from the Rebbe. But those who've had it through letters, or they've had through Igros Kodesh, and so on, you can see how there's this unbelievable fusion of the two absolute distant, contrasting points like that. And that's Dawki, the koyach of the Atzmas himself. And therefore the Rebbe said about the Friedricher Rebbe and about a Nasi Amiti, and the Rebbe said it in a way that he didn't want it to be made public. Although the Chassidim did make it public, and after it was made public, the Rebbe did not withdraw. He did not withdraw from it. He put up with the artillery that was aimed at him a bit, but he didn't withdraw. And the Rebbe said that Emerson Nasi by Israel is Atzmas Ein Sof in a guf. In other words, he has the same control and the same ability, mitzad Havdalah, to come down into each and every individual, and yet he's a, he's a mentioner in the world. He's there, you know. In other words, I don't know if he's limited inside the body like we are, or upon him he's inside a body, and maybe that itself is an amazing feat. But he is there, in the body. Of a mela, it's not shaykh that a thing like that can ever really just stop functioning. If it's an inyan of Atzmas Eitzov, and it's been put by Atzmas Eitzov also into the inyan of the guf, which is also Atzmas Eitzov. Kacha Katuv Chassidus, so the koyach to create the physical body, also Atzmas Eitzov. So you've got both of them together. It's not shaykh any, how do you call, limitation or stop, or in any way a weakening in a thing like that. It's something which is obviously not only nitzchi, how do you call it, higher than time, but it always remains with the same toikev, the same, how do you call it, powerful. And on the contrary, not only it doesn't get any weaker, but l'chora, by definition, it can and must just keep expanding. And so that's what we see. And those are the two things that I want to try and get over, that the whole inyan of Yud Aleph, Antu Chad, V'loi B'chushban, is higher, even though it would appear to be lower, it's really higher than Havdalah, Gemura, altogether from Histalsha. Because if it can be moved out, Legami from Histalsha, but nonetheless affect the Histalsha and be part of that and be in it, well, that's the absolute ability of omnipotence. Well, that's the etzem shleimus of the Kol Yochel. Therefore, we say that on Friday afternoon, just before Shabbos, coming in, Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban. And then later we say about him that he is Ilas HaIlos V'sibas HaSibos. Yeah, and that's Mamali Kolam and Tzoiva Kolam. Because Ilas HaIlos is how the Eibster made the Stalzlers, because Ile V'olu, they have a kesser, one with the other, even though they go a tremendous way down, but the Ile and the Olu have a relationship nonetheless. And so that's called Mamali Kol Almin. Of a Sibas HaSibais, or that's the Eibster K'moisha Hu, and a Siba is not something that necessarily has anything to do with the Masuval. It's brought down and said that a Siba is just a being what it is. It makes things happen. Therefore, a Siba and a Masuval don't necessarily have any real kesher. So in our shul, is anybody here who learns in our shul on Wednesday night? No. No, nobody. Yehudi, you don't know. We have a shiur on Wednesday. Mendel. Mendel learns in the shiur. As אתה היית עוד לפני שאתה נסעת. But the Rebbe says over there, for example, he says Amalek, we're talking about Amalek, that the Torah says Amalek is a very terrible power in the Indian of Clippers. And he's called Rashis Goyim. He's the beginning and like the end also of all the Goyim. He's like a sort of a source point for all the Tzoras, which represent the Goyim. I mean, there's some Goyim that they're not Tzoras. But we're talking what the symbol of Goyim is. Yeah. The Rebbe teaches us of the Katlamadno, a Maimon, the Rebbe says that Amalek is not a Harikot Ilas, Gabi all the Goyim. They don't just derive from him by way of descent, in a normal way. No, he's like a Sibba, he's a reason why all the other Goyim are there. Which means that if you fall into the hands of Amalek, you're likely to sort of be open to any artillery from any of the Goyim. You can fall in anywhere, anytime, because he's just a Sibba for all the other Goyim, who moved on him, and therefore he makes them all happen. And that's in Lo Tov. And in Tov, it's the inyan for Saiva and Mamali, that the whole inyan of Ilas is itself a Sibba or a Masuvav from the Seiva of Kolam. The Eibster is like a Siva, Kola Sivas, how he is, Model from all the world. Of a mirror that comes down, and there's certain koyach which is given into the hands of a emes melech by Yisrael. And that's the koyach of David HaMelech, the ability to be koilol in himself, or the Oyer Ein Sof, how he's completely moved on.